Once upon a time, in the small, quiet town of Maplewood, something very strange happened. Maplewood was famous for its peaceful streets, friendly people, and beautiful gardens. But one day, a big mystery began, and everyone in the town was talking about it. Mrs. Thompson was the richest woman in Maplewood. She lived in a large mansion on the hill. Mrs. Thompson had many valuable things, but her favourite was a huge diamond called the Star of Maplewood. It was the biggest and most beautiful diamond in the whole country. Mrs. Thompson kept it in a special glass case in her living room. One morning, Mrs. Thompson woke up to find her precious diamond missing. The glass case was broken, and there was no sign of the Star of Maplewood. Mrs. Thompson was very upset. She called the police right away. Detective Brown, the best detective in Maplewood, arrived at the mansion quickly. He was a tall man with sharp eyes and a clever mind. He loved solving mysteries and was very good at his job. "Don't worry, Mrs. Thompson," said Detective Brown. "We will find your diamond. I promise." Detective Brown started his investigation. He first looked at the broken glass case. It seemed like someone had used a tool to break it. He then checked the room for clues. There were no fingerprints or footprints, which was very strange. It seemed like the thief knew exactly what they were doing. Next, Detective Brown talked to the people who worked in the mansion. There was the cook, Mr. Green, the gardener, Miss Daisy, and the maid, Anna. All of them said they were sleeping when the diamond was stolen. They looked very worried and scared. "I believe you," said Detective Brown, "but I need to ask you some more questions. Did you see or hear anything unusual last night?" Mr. Green, the cook, said, "No, Detective. I was in the kitchen all night preparing food for the party we are having tonight. I didn't hear anything." Miss Daisy, the gardener, said, "I was in the garden until late at night, but I didn't see anyone come near the mansion." Anna, the maid, said, "I was cleaning the rooms upstairs. I heard a noise, but I thought it was just the wind." Detective Brown thought for a moment. Then he decided to check the garden. Maybe there was something there that could help him solve the mystery. In the garden, Detective Brown saw something shiny under a bush. He picked it up and found a small piece of glass. It looked like it was from the broken glass case. He also saw some footprints near the bush. They were small, like a child's footprints. Detective Brown followed the footprints. They led him to a small shed at the end of the garden. He opened the door and found a young boy inside. The boy looked very scared. "Don't be afraid," said Detective Brown gently. "What's your name?" "My name is Tim," said the boy. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble." "Can you tell me what happened?" asked Detective Brown. Tim started to cry. "I'm sorry," he said. "I wanted to see the diamond. I've heard so much about it. I didn't want to steal it. I just wanted to see it up close. But when I touched the glass case, it broke. I got scared and ran away. I didn't know what to do." Detective Brown smiled kindly at the boy. "It's okay, Tim. I believe you. But we need to return the diamond to Mrs. Thompson. Do you know where it is?" Tim nodded and pointed to a small box in the corner of the shed. Detective Brown opened the box and found the Star of Maplewood inside. It was safe and sound. Detective Brown took Tim back to the mansion. Mrs. Thompson was very happy to get her diamond back. She thanked Detective Brown and Tim. "Thank you for being honest, Tim," said Mrs. Thompson. "I know you didn't mean any harm, but next time, please ask if you want to see something. I would have shown you the diamond." Tim promised he would never do something like that again. Mrs. Thompson forgave him and even invited him to the party that night. However, Detective Brown wasn't satisfied. Something still didn't feel right. The boy's story was touching, but it didn't explain the missing fingerprints and the clean cut on the glass. He decided to stay for the party and keep his eyes open for any further clues. During the party, Detective Brown mingled with the guests, listening to their conversations. Among the guests were some of Maplewood's most influential people. He noticed Mr. James, a well-known businessman, behaving oddly. Mr. James seemed nervous and kept glancing at the diamond on display. Detective Brown approached Mr. James. "Good evening, Mr. James. Enjoying the party?" Mr. James forced a smile. "Yes, Detective. It's a wonderful event." "I noticed you seem quite interested in the diamond," Detective Brown remarked. Mr. James laughed nervously. "Who wouldn't be? It's a magnificent piece." Detective Brown continued to watch Mr. James closely. Later, he saw Mr. James slipping away from the crowd and heading towards the garden. Detective Brown followed him discreetly. Mr. James went to the same shed where Tim had been found. He looked around and pulled out a small tool from his pocket, the same kind of tool that could break a glass case. Detective Brown stepped out of the shadows. "Mr. James, I think you have some explaining to do." Mr. James was startled. I can explain," he stammered. "I needed money. My business is failing, and I thought if I could sell the diamond, I could save it." "But you used Tim to cover your tracks," Detective Brown said. "You let him take the blame while you planned to steal it during the party." Mr. James hung his head in shame. "Yes, it's true. I saw Tim sneaking around the garden, and I used the opportunity to frame him." Detective Brown escorted Mr. James back to the mansion and explained everything to Mrs. Thompson and the guests. They were shocked and disappointed. The police took Mr. James into custody. Mrs. Thompson was grateful to Detective Brown. "You not only found my diamond, but also saved an innocent boy from being blamed." Tim was relieved and thanked Detective Brown for believing in him. The party continued, but now with a sense of justice restored. The town of Maplewood returned to its peaceful state, and Detective Brown was once again the hero of the day. And so, the case of the missing diamond was truly solved, with everyone learning the importance of honesty and trust.